All right. Welcome back. So last week we had almost got to the part where we were talking about various templates that you should be using to complete the assignment. And I just wanted to go over that a little bit. In the assignment, as I have mentioned a couple of times, this is to create a prototype of something that we'll be building throughout the semester, right? So none of the functionality that is hinted at here, such as sorting, being able to actually drag things around or delete or add or actually manipulate the data. None of that. We're working on that for this assignment, right? That will be, we need JavaScript for that, right? So we'll be starting JavaScript this week, and then we'll come back and make all this live, right? Also, we are repeating a lot of the code, and I see that a lot of the headers and the sidebars and the footers, right? A lot of that is being repeated over and over, amongst the 4 or 5 pages that you're creating. When we introduce JavaScript today and Angular next week, we'll be revisiting this using a technique that will allow us to identify these as partial pieces, right, of a page that we can then dynamically load, right, to build the page, to include this content dynamically, right, and build the page dynamically, right. In that case, we'll talk about be able to define modules that you can do a lot of reusability, right? You can reuse a lot of these components to build pages much faster. But we're not there yet, right? We're working with static content, right? And again, it's a prototype, something that you can put something together and have a discussion with your clients, right? With the business analysts, with the whoever's giving you this task, and identify. Be able to have a conversation with these folks on the viability of the UI. Are we missing something? Is a use case that we're suggesting here, is it being met by the user interface? Yes. So these prototypes, before we get any chance to start actually making it work, we need to have a discussion. Is this the UI that you want, right? As much as possible, right? We can't foresee everything. But first prototype, and then this is just kind of like a facade, right? It's like an empty shell that we'll then fill in the details later on. Okay. So also the wireframes, as I mentioned, the wireframes that I've given you, only the first 7 pages, right, are applied to this assignment. We'll be adding more and more things such as pop-ups and dialogues and things like that. For that, we'll need a JavaScript, right? Which we'll start this week. So don't take a look at the dialogues. Also, we mentioned that you should not download, even though I give you the link to download. You should not download, right? You should be linking to CDNs for Bootstrap. That's about it, right? We don't have JavaScript. It is not required that you use JavaScript, but if you feel comfortable and you've worked already with Bootstrap and jQuery, go ahead, right? Include the JavaScript, the jQuery, if you feel comfortable, right? But it's not a requirement, okay? If that's so, then I like you. If you are going to use jQuery and the Bootstrap JavaScript, again, link to the CDNs. Do not download, right? You're deploying to production. If you want to have a separate download distribution library for you to test and develop locally, that's fine. But whatever gets deployed to production, right, I want the CDNs. We point out that you should be using all these various templates. I give hyperlinks to the Bootstrap dashboard template, right? That gives you a header, a sidebar, footer. I don't know if it gives you. I don't think it gives you footer, but it gives you a starting point to create the web pages. It looks something like this. Certainly, these are not the links we need, but it gives you an example of how to highlight a link, how to put spaces between the links. Okay, Also gives you at the top the header, where how do you put links on the header, how do you put some the name of your project or some image that you might use. So the only thing we're going to keep from the top level is the project name and a couple links on the right hand side. We don't need that search field there. But nevertheless, this template kind of gives you an example. How would you put something together using the Bootstrap template? In the middle, right, in the main content, you're going to be substituting that with various pages, right, with a home, with users, admin, and forms and whatnot. Yes. Again, this sidebar and the header is going to be repeated over and over and over in all these pages. I understand that. We will be introducing ngView that allows you to dynamically, load in partials, and we'll see how to do that. But again, we need JavaScript, right, which will start this week. I also give you links to various classes that you should be using for the tabs, for the glyphicons, for the forms, and that is I mean, there's quite a lot in there in Bootstrap, and I'm only pointing you to one of the more useful ones, right? That you're going to be finding yourself using over and over and over. I certainly suggest that. Encourage you to go over the all the various classes that are out there before you reinvent something. Right? It says, I wonder if it's already there in Bootstrap, right? If there's already a class that I can use that will do that for me. Okay. So first, see if it's already there. If it's there, right? Use that. Otherwise, refer to use plain old CSS to do it. Okay. Again, we're looking to really embrace rapid prototyping, right? If we see something that's a solution for it, go for it, okay? And build on it. So let's see. So the glyphicons, I think we talked about the glyphicons. Tab for navigation. A lot of them are here in the CSS. So for instance, you have for the tables are here, right? That allows you to, just by adding the table class to the table elements, just makes it so much prettier. You can add the table stripes to add to highlight every other row. You can add borders. Somebody was asking on Piazza how to add borders, right? You just add table bordered, right? And the whole table is bordered, right? No need to reinvent CSS for this. Right. Obviously, it's a good practice just to learn, right? But again, if it's already there, there's quite a few other things that we're not going to use in this. But you can highlight the ones that you hover over, right? You can highlight it with various colors, green, blue, yellow, right? Like for instance, if you select on a row, right? There's all sorts of very useful things. We did talk about responsive tables, though, right? We had an example on that showed you that when if you want to maintain the tabular format, right, and you don't want your content to be crunched up, right, you can add a div around it, right, to wrap it around that table, and the table becomes responsive, right? It maintains its content without crunching it up, right, and so that you can scroll horizontally in a smaller format, right? Let's see. We did talk about their grid system, right? We did talk about the grid system. How much better theirs is, obviously, right? Where you have the various 12 columns, all the various combinations, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 12 columns wide, and different versions of those, right? Medium, large, small, and extra small, right? That allowed you to target smaller size form factors that where you want to force those smaller devices, right, to maintain the format, right, or the layout, regardless of their size, right? You want to maintain that. If you really need 2 or 3 or 4 columns in such a small device, you can force that. We also looked at components a little bit. Some of the glyphicons and icons, they're all free to use, right? So most of what you're going to need is here, and they're being updated. Right, in every version of Bootstrap, new icons come up, or they change them a little bit to look even prettier. A couple more things. Navigation. We're using, I believe, just tabs for navigation, right? To be able to navigate between forms and their fields, right? In the assignment. For highlighting, I mean, right now, the highlight, right, to activate one of these, right, you can just use the class active, right, and the tab highlights, right. Right now, it's easy because you're navigating from one page or the other, right, and both pages, they're independent of each other, and you can activate one or activate the other, right. You can activate the form tab or the field tab, yes. So that's easy. But when we get into reusing code and dynamically loading things, right? We're gonna need JavaScript to highlight these, right? We're gonna have to. We're not reloading the page, right? It's gonna be a single page application, and we're gonna have to revisit this and how to highlight these tabs. There are quite a few other versions of tabs called pills that are basically functionally the same thing. But often they're used as a secondary navigational mechanism, right? You can have a primary on the left-hand side where you have the sidebar, then you have maybe tabs at the top, and below that you can have pills, and we use it quite a bit in our portal, right? In our portal you have this left-hand side navigation, right, and then on the right-hand side you have these tabs, and under that you have pills, right? That's a very common navigational design pattern, right? And they're all taken from Bootstrap, okay, from here. There's different versions, right? You can justify them so they take up the entire width of the page. I mean, there's quite a lot. I'm not there's no way to cover the entire Bootstrap, but we're gonna just grab the highlights. But again, I encourage you to explore this quite a bit. The other thing that we do use in the assignment is the forms, yeah, and the forms, right? As we said last week, right? You can just copy from here, right? Some of these layouts, right, to create these horizontal or vertical forms, right? And also if they're responsive, right? They might be horizontal when you have enough space, but they become vertical when you in a smaller form factor, right? So again, I encourage you to copy and paste all of this content and reuse it as much as possible. What else? You can add add-ons to a field. So for instance, to this field, you can add some glyphicons on the left-hand side or the right-hand side as a trailing or prepended or appended to either side, right? By using group add-ons, right? So for instance, we have an input group here, right? This input group here, right? That it's collating three elements, right? One of them is the $sign, right? Then you have the input field, right? And then you have this 00 trailing afterward, right? And just by adding input groups, right, it adds all the classes and all the formatting, right, to create this 3-element field, right, with some additional information for the user, some context for the user. Very, very nice. Okay. So yeah, so right, so this last week and today we're done with most of our static content coverage, right? So we're gonna move on to becoming a lot more dynamic, right? A lot of the content that we're going to be generating now is going to be very dynamic, right? This content that we've been working on for the first assignment, and it's due at the end of this week. It's something you might get from a designer, right? Maybe from a Photoshop, and then you've broken out all the content and created a static content element pages, yes, and tried out the navigation. Now comes the where's the real data, right? What are the real content that we're going to display, right? The content on display right now is all static, right? And that's dynamic content. We're going to generate it using JavaScript, right? So today's lecture And for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about a lot of JavaScript, right? I always like to recoup on where is it that we've been and where we're going. So let me draw this a little bit on where we are. Let's see if it's going to work. I hope this works. No. So up to this point, let's see. We have what? We have here's a server, right? Which is Node.js for now, right? And Node.js is hosting various static content, right? So the static content might be, HTML, right? Might be CSS for now, right? And here's our browser, right? And I often refer to the browser as the client. So here's the Node.js, which is our server, right? And these clients, at the URL when you type it or hit on or click on links, right? All of these are generating get HTTP requests. Okay, they're generating HTTP requests. Now these HTTP requests, from the client's point of view, wherever you type on the URL, these are all GET requests, right? The HTTP protocol allows for various types of requests, right? It allows to generate GETs, right? Posts, puts, deletes, right? Quite a few others, but those are the 4 or 5 that we're going to be using most in this class, right? By default, browsers, right, from the URL, the only thing that they can generate is a GET. Okay, the browser receives a URL, right, in the HTTP request, and it maps that URL to a static element, right, a physical file on the server, right. It maps the slash, the root of the URL to some root directory, physical directory on the file system. Okay, and that's going to be like that for a couple of weeks, right? But we're going to start introducing the fact that this URL doesn't need to map to something physical, right, to a physical file, right? It could be a virtual, right? It could be a logical path as opposed to a physical path, right? And we'll talk about, how this URL can be more powerful than just mapping to a physical file, right? But for now, right, whatever you have here, right, maps to one of these files on the file system, some physical thing, right? And when you request that document, the document gets downloaded, right? Typically it's some HTML at first that gets downloaded. The HTML typically has links to other resources, right? It might have a link to a CSS, right? It might have a link to a JavaScript. It might have a link to images, right? And these can live anywhere, right? For instance, the CSS might live back on the server again. So once the HTML gets downloaded and you have a physical copy on your client machine, right? The browser reads it and sees, oh, you're referring to some CSS that lives elsewhere, right? Let me go fetch that. Okay, it goes back to our server and fetches the CSS, or if you're using a CDN like you should, right? It'll go to CDN and download that CSS, right? Right, or it might go down to jQuery or Google, right? They have lots and lots of open source libraries that can be downloaded. They host a lot of, they are code repositories. They are one of several CDNs that are repositories for all these things, right? You might go to YouTube, or you might go off to to Google to retrieve images, right? So all these can live anywhere on the cloud, right? Or some of them might live on our servers. Yes, certainly if it's CSS. Oops, if it's CSS that we wrote, right, our own, right, such as we might have written a style CSS to override some of the Bootstrap styling. Certainly that's going to come from our servers, right? If we wrote our own, main.js, right, hosted at our servers, right? Certainly that will be downloaded by the HTML page, right? Download from our servers, right? But some of the JavaScript from Bootstrap JavaScript or Java or jQuery or any of these other libraries, right? Typically they'll be hosted at CDNs, right? Code repositories that are out there on the cloud. And the browser has no problem retrieving all these things, regardless where they live in the universe. Well, Earth for now. Make sense? So this is where we are. This is where we are. So we're going to introduce now the notion of that the content is going to be generated dynamically, right? So same thing, right? On the client, right? We're going to be asking for pages, right, from the server. But a new type of file that we're going to be asking for is JavaScript, right? So we're going to be asking either from our own, maybe some kind of main.js or maybe an app.js, right? Not only are we going to be downloading HTML, right? HTML, but we're going to be downloading this JavaScript, right? Now the JavaScript can be either embedded inside of the page, right? Or the page can refer to a JavaScript outside of the document, right? Much better, right? So typically we'll ask for some HTML, right? The HTML will download, and the HTML will go fetch the JavaScript that it needs to download it, right? Now that JavaScript, the JavaScript is going to be code, right? It's going to be things that we write, right? We wrote the HTML, we wrote the JavaScript. It's our code, right? We don't control who's downloading it, right? This browser over here, I don't know who they are. We don't know who they are, right? Some of them might be Chrome, some of them might be IE, right? Safari, whatever. We don't control that. So the JavaScript, when it downloads, right, needs to cater to different browsers, right? Some of these browsers are very new. They support the latest versions of JavaScript. Some are much older JavaScript, right? And they don't support. Some older browsers, they don't support the latest standards, right? They don't support the latest HTML. They don't support the latest JavaScript. But we only have one JavaScript, right? Now our JavaScript has to be able to cater to different browsers, and early on when we identified this issue, right, that we didn't control who was going to download us, right? We find ourselves writing a lot of code that that had to identify who the browser was, right? What browser am I running? Oh, IE. Oh my goodness, it doesn't support this. It doesn't support that, right? It has a slightly different JavaScript version, right? And it has this object is called here in IE, but it's called something else in Chrome and something else in Safari, right? So it was a nightmare, right? And we quickly introduced libraries that dealt with this issue, right? jQuery has become one of the most popular JavaScript libraries that allows you to kind of like create an abstraction of the browser, so you don't have to deal with the various idiosyncrasies of the browser, right? It's if you code to the jQuery library, jQuery handles the fact that it's this browser or that other browser or that other browser, right? And it sends the right commands to the underlying browser, right, to do whatever it is that you want to do, right? So it allows us to code to a higher level, right, of a high level of abstraction. But before we get to jQuery, let's play around with just plain old JavaScript, right? So the idea here is that the client downloads the HTML, right? And the HTML will have all sorts of elements, right? We'll have H1s, paragraphs, divs, spans, all sorts of elements. The elements are parsed by the browser. It parses the browser. It parses this HTML document, this text document, and it creates an object representation, right? So a whole bunch of objects, right? Arrays and various collections, right? That represent this document on the browser, right? We refer to this as the DOM, right? It's a model, right? That's what the M stands for, right? It's an object model, right? That represents the document you just downloaded. You downloaded the document. I need to, if you have an H1, well, H1 is an object, right? It has fonts associated with it, right? It has paddings associated with it, right? It has a color. It has all sorts of things associated with whole sorts of attributes associated with it. So I need to represent that, right? So all these nodes here, are in the RAM of your computer, right? In the RAM of your browser, the browser, and asks for RAM to represent this object model, and it renders it. It renders it. So JavaScript, what JavaScript is going to allow us to do, right? Once you download the JavaScript, or if it's embedded in your HTML, it allows you to programmatically manipulate this object. Okay, it allows us to add to the object, clip things out, remove them, modify the attributes, and whenever we touch the DOM, the browser says, "Oh, the model has changed. I need to re-update and re-render." Right, re-render the page. Yes. So if you programmatically, remove an H1 or remove a paragraph, right, the browser will respond by, re-rendering whatever the object model says. Right. If you change the position, the XY position of a paragraph, right, programmatically, the browser will respond by, animating and moving your paragraph around. Right. So the JavaScript file that gets downloaded, right, and it's now, right, running on your browser, right, is dynamically manipulating the DOM, and it becomes our application running on the client. An application has been downloaded, source has been downloaded, right, and it's now running on the client, right, and we can control the browser. We can receive events from the browser as people interact with the browser, dragging, moving the keyboard, right? All those things that users do with their browsers, those can be intercepted by our JavaScript, right? And we can take action, right? We can interact with the end user. Now, so it's great, right? So we can control what the browser does, but because we've downloaded because we've downloaded code, there's also some risk associated. It says, it was a hard pill to swallow to convince people that says, hey, you're downloading somebody else's source code, and I am going to execute it on my system, right? And a lot of times, this source code, I don't even know that it's being downloaded, right? I mean, we've become so accustomed to allowing JavaScript to be downloaded that we don't even think about it, right? That we're visiting these websites, source code is being downloaded, it's running on our local machine. So a lot of hurdles, security hurdles, we have to go through a lot of hurdles on creating this. Now people feel more comfortable downloading these pages and allowing these things running on our machines. Java went through it when they had applets, right? And they made a big deal on making sure that the applets that were downloaded from the server and were running, right, on your browser, right, making sure that that they could not access the local file system, right, that they could not access the camera or the microphone, or they couldn't do some network connection somewhere else, right? Again, trying to convince the community that it was safe. It was okay for you to download source code, somebody else's source code, run it compiled on your machine, right? And I think we've finally, right, reached critical mass where we take it for granted, right, that we're downloading somebody else's code and we're running it on our machines, right? Okay. So anyway, because of the security concerns, we box the JavaScript so that it's only allowed to do certain things. Okay, we don't allow it to do, for instance, network connections. It says, what do you mean network? I can't connect to anybody? Yes, JavaScript can't go off. The browser can. Yes, the browser can download images from one place, JavaScript from one place, right? CSS from another place. It can go off and, it can't connect to the network, yes? But JavaScript, right, because this is somebody else's code, it's not, right, the browser was written by Google, yes? Or was written by Microsoft or Apple, right? And we entrust the browser because we understand what it's doing. It needs to be able to download all these resources from a whole bunch of places. And we've given up on securing this, and we said, yes, go ahead, download whatever you need, yes? But JavaScript, somebody else, who wrote this? I don't know who they are. That's certainly not Google, certainly not Apple, certainly not Microsoft, right? Who are you? The browser enforces certain things on downloaded JavaScript, Right? For instance, it will not allow JavaScript to go off and do network connections willy-nilly, right? Who are you talking to? Who are you? I'm typing something at the keyboard, and you are intercepting my key presses. Who are you sending this to, right? So, for instance, one of the things that it makes sure is that it keeps track of where these JavaScript were downloaded from, right? I downloaded from this server, right? Meaning I kind of because I downloaded from the server, I am voting that I trust this server, right? And because there's an implicit trust from this server that I'm visiting, right? If I'm going to CNN or I'm going to wherever, if the JavaScript gets downloaded from CNN, right? I've said that I trust CNN. I trust that the JavaScript should be able to talk back to CNN. That's okay. So browsers, right? Well, newer browsers, enforce this kind of security, right? If I download a JavaScript from one domain, I will allow that JavaScript to talk back to the domain where it was downloaded from, right? But nowhere else. I won't let it, download from CNN, but then talk to, click whatever something, right? Wherever, right? We call these that when a JavaScript tries to talk to anywhere else, to other domains, we call that cross-domain scripting, right? We don't allow that. We allow JavaScript scripts, right, to talk back to the servers from where they were downloaded from originally, right? And why would they want to talk to servers back, right? Well, because here I am on the client, because the JavaScript is running on the client, I'm very limited. I'm very, very limited. I can only, right, see what the user is doing, right? As the user is typing, right? I can see the mouse, I can see the keyboard, right? I can see from JavaScript, I can manipulate the user interface, right? But I can render content and says, well, but what content am I rendering, right? Right. Up to this point, the only content that I have is the original content that was downloaded with the HTML page, right? The HTML page came with its own content, right? Maybe with some marketing, right? Some ads, some navigational stuff, right? Some headers, some footers, some hello, right? But what about other content, right? I want to make it dynamic. Well, JavaScript, as we'll be introducing in the next couple classes, we're going to have JavaScript go back right to the server to dynamically ask for more content. Okay, so for instance, we don't, as the user interacts with the user interface, they want to be able to save their content, right? As they're entering data, maybe they're filling out forms, and maybe they're they're adding this, they're removing this. Where's that being stored? Well, we can't store it in the browser, right? The browser doesn't have a database. Well, it does, right? A very, very small one. But we want to come back tomorrow, right? And log in again and see our changes, right? We want to see this. Well, for that, we're going to be using JavaScript, right, to take the content, right, all the data, and we're going to pass it back to the server so that server-side technologies can then save data, right, in the database, right? And then same thing, retrieve data from the server and then pass it back to the client. It'll be a back and forth, right, between JavaScript and server-side resources, right, that are going to be talking, right, behind the scenes, right, exchanging data, right. This data has a format. The format is a JSON format, right, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation, right. It's a format of data that's becoming more and more popular, as we're creating more and more of these applications, these dynamic applications, and we have all these phones talking, through networks and whatnot. This format of exchanging data between clients and servers becomes more and more common, especially because on the client, the only thing that you can execute, right, is JavaScript, right? The native language, right, that all browsers understand is JavaScript. Although, right, you can have other things running on the browser. Obviously, you can have certainly you can have applets, right? You can have Flash, right? All these can have their own protocols in their own ways to talking, maybe binary representation of data, that too. But the natively, right, browsers can talk JavaScript, right? And because it's becoming so much pervasive, so very pervasive, JSON has become more and more popular as a format of data exchange. Okay. All right. So let's get started. There's a couple of examples that are available on the in the portal. So this is a, let's see, portal. So this is a portal. I've made available this new module, right? The client-side development module that has quite a few lectures that introduce JavaScript, introduce jQuery, AngularJS, right? And you should certainly start going through all those videos, right? And come to class with questions, and if you want any doubts, please let me know. As a course map, let's see where we are. So we've gone through some of the user interfaces. I guess the numbering is wrong, right? Setup is 1. Oh no, that's right. Client development. Yes. We've gone through HTML, CSS, Bootstrap. We still need some of these concepts are going to stick with us, right? HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. We're not going to be talking about Node.js quite a bit or OpenShift as much, but so these are the topics that we're going to be introducing this semester. The client JavaScript, in the client side, we're going to be developing applications on the client side. We're going to be using JavaScript, JSON, jQuery UI, Ajax web service clients, and AngularJS. Right, so for the next couple of weeks, this is going to be our bread and butter. Lectures. Please take a look at these videos. Right. Again, we spent some time developing them. Please go over these. Right. And also here I have on the last 3 tabs over here are examples. Right. There's source code that show the easiest, right, and they progressively get a little more sophisticated. Right. Starting they build up in complexity, but let's go through a couple of these, right? Oops. All right, turn this off. So yeah, hello world. Right. So all these are examples. Right. So this introduces the fact that you can to basically program, right, or develop on the client side, on the browser, right. We need to use a new element, a new HTML element called the script element. Okay, and you can either embed your code right here, right, inside of the script element, right, such as, for instance, in this case, we're just saying alert in hello world. Or better, right, as we progress, ideally you would write it in a separate file, in a separate JavaScript file, right, and then link from here. Right? It says, hey, there's a source file over there, right, and bring it over here. Because again, just like CSS, right, you want to make some of this code reusable, right? Some of these are modular, right, so that you can link them from various pages, right, and then you can share across several pages. So yeah, so over here we have a very simple one that example where it runs alert, and you have some text in here. Inside of a script, you can exchange either single quotes or double quotes are interchangeable in JavaScript as long as you're consistent. Right? If you open a single quote, you have to close it with a single quote. Same thing with double quotes. If you use one or the other quotes, you can use the other quote inside. So you can have, outside you can have single quotes, and then inside of the string you can have double quotes, right? Or vice versa. Right? If you have outside double quotes, inside of string you can have single quotes, right? And you can escape them just like you would in any other language with a backslash. What to tell you? It behaves very much like any other language you might be familiar with, right? We have variables, Right, so here's an example. Each source. Right, where we have a script at the top, right? It creates 3 variables, A, B, and C, and you can have all sorts of mathematical expressions. Notice that the variables are declared with the keyword var, right? So JavaScript, as you might know, is weakly typed. Okay, so we don't declare it strong. They're not strongly typed like other languages like Java or C#, where you have to explicitly determine that a language, that a particular variable will be of a particular type, right? Integer or double, float, strings, right? Here, the type of the variable is determined at runtime, right? From the context, right? If you have a plus, it says, oh, let me try and apply the addition operator, right? So it'll try to convert its variables to an integer representation or a number representation, right? And it'll try to do arithmetic addition, right? Right, but if I put one of them is a string, right? If one of the if one of the parameters in the addition is a string, it'll infer that, oh, you don't want additional arithmetic addition. You mean concatenation, right? String concatenation. So it's smart like that, right? Depending on the parameters, it behaves differently. Okay. There's quite a few libraries that are available that are loaded, that are part of the language, right? Math is one of them that declares quite a few mathematical functions, right? All the trigonometric functions are there, logarithmics are there, everything we would expect in any serious language. They're all there. They also support object orientation, right? You can create classes, you can create instances, objects. It does support somewhat of something that looks like inheritance, but it's not really inheritance. It's what we'll call prototypical inheritance, right? We'll play around with that a little later when we talk about object orientation. For those that are coming from Java or real object-oriented languages, it'll be a little disconcerting, the way JavaScript handles inheritance. Let's see. So the script tag. Notice that here the script tag is embedded right in the code, right? And just to play around with it, that's fine, right? To talk about it educationally, it's fine. But remember, it's always much better to link JavaScript in a separate file. Okay. Oops. Let's see. You can do loops, obviously. So, for instance, here we're declaring a variable called factorial, and we're iterating over we're declaring I as a new variable. Right, we're iterating from I to 5, and then we're computing the factorial. Right? We're multiplying all the values between 1 and 5, and at the end we're just alerting how much the factorial is. All the various looping mechanisms are there. So whiles is there, do while is there, right? For is there, and it behaved like you would expect. Notice that we declared the variable I here, right? Just inline instead of the for loop, like you would perhaps in Java. You might say int I. Don't forget to use the var. If you don't use the var, the keyword var, that's okay. The language the compiler won't complain. But the variable now will be part of a global space, okay? Which we'll talk about global space in a minute, and what are the the gotchas of global space. Okay? But for now, remember always to use var. Arrays. Arrays are declared using the square bracket as opposed to the curly brackets in other languages. Okay, and so here we're declaring variable values that has 10 integers, right? And here we're declaring a couple of variables, min and max, and we're going to iterate over the array looking for the minimum and the maximum. Notice here we're iterating using the variable I all the way to the values dot length. Every array has a dot length property, right? So you can know how big the array is. You can add to the array using the push function. So you can say, array dot push, right? And you can add. So it's very nice, right? Like a dynamic array, right? Like we have in Java, you can append, right? You can add things. Like collections. You can also remove using splice. Okay. Here we're iterating of the array. We're checking to see. We're comparing the values of I with our current minimum, or comparing with a current max. If we find something that's smaller, we grab that value. If we find something that is bigger, we grab that value. Right. And at the end, we alert when we found the minimum and the max. Yes. Obviously, we have if statements, right? Like this suggests, we have if, right? And all the various constructs are there, right? If else, right? You can nest them. You also have switch case, right? What else? Yeah, I mean everything you would expect a decent language will have. Some of these functions, like alert, right? A lot of these functions are specific to the browser. Okay, so alert, right? Since you are in a browser, will pop up a dialog, right? But as we'll see later on when we go to Node.js, right, which we'll still code in JavaScript, but we're not going to be coding on a browser. We're going to be coding JavaScript on a server, right, on a desktop. We won't have alert, right? There is no user interface, right? It'd still be JavaScript, right? But running on a desktop, there is no user interface, so alert won't be there, right? Confirm won't be there. The DOM won't be there. So any of those, a lot of the JavaScript that we're going to see today, right, and in the next couple of weeks, these are, a lot of these operations are client-side operations, right? We're manipulating some kind of user interface. We won't have that on the server, right? So just keep that in mind. That many of these functions and functionality is only available on the browser. Okay. Document. So when the browser parses the HTML document, as I said mentioned earlier, it creates a DOM, right? It creates several nodes, right, that represent each element on the page, right, and their attributes, and you can programmatically, right, manipulate these properties, right, to move things around, right, to hide them, to add new content. Well, it creates an object. JavaScript creates an object called document. There it is at the top, right, that represents this DOM. Right, and you can programmatically interact with it, right? You can add new content, right, by simply just saying, "I want to write to it. I want to, here's a piece of text, right? I want to add it to the existing document." Yes. Now notice that this JavaScript notice that it has h1 document object. You see that? And that right after that you have a script tag, and it writes "Hello World." And the way this is rendered is that, right, by the time this script executes, the only thing in the DOM is that h1, right? This h2 down below is not there yet. Okay, so that's why when it renders, notice that it has "Hello World," right? So this is our h1 that was statically there, right? We typed it in there. Whereas over here, the second one, this "Hello World" here, was dynamically added using document.write. Okay, and whatever we put in the string there, we could add actual HTML in that string, right? And it would render using that particular format, right? Notice that this is the text of the document, but if I ask here and I say, I want to see your elements, I want to see what is the DOM what does the browser think this document is, right? If I go in there and I go into the body, right? Notice that the text has been added. You see that? There it is, hello world, right? Right. So after this has executed, right, notice that the text is there. Notice that this hello world is not in the original source. Yeah, it's not in the original source. But the browser think it is because it parsed it, it executed. When it executed, it manipulated the DOM. It added this text content to the DOM, right? And it rendered. That's why this renders. This is why this renders, right? Then let's see. We have here in our scripts, right after we have this static H2, we are dynamically adding a UL, right? And then we are iterating 10 times, right? Adding an LI, a line item, a hello sub I, and then closing the line item, and then statically, and then dynamically closing the UL. And if we go back here, we'll notice that that's exactly what made it into the DOM. See that? Right. So the browser, as you're adding content, as you're writing content to the DOM, it's parsing it, right? It's interpreting it, right? And it's manipulating the DOM accordingly. Notice that the script is there. The script is there. And right after the script, we have the UL that we dynamically enter. Notice that in the original source code, there is no UL. See that? There is no UL, no LI. We dynamically generated it, right? Right now is no different than static, right? We are statically generating dynamic content, if that makes any sense, right? Right? What we really want to do, what will become very, very interesting is when this content comes from the server, right? Or comes from, querying YouTube or querying, IMDb, right, with dynamic content, right? We send out a search string, right, and it comes back with, movie titles and show times and, right, and reviews, and we can dynamically, add this content to our browser, right? That will be very interesting, but we're doing baby steps, right? We want to see how is it that you can dynamically, right, manipulate the DOM. Then we have math, right? One of the, yes? You have a question?
Yes.
Yes.
So you recommend us to write another file for the JavaScript. So how could we know that which code should respond to which place in the HTML?
Right. So
use the tag or
yeah, you'll have to identify, right, give IDs or classes or in your static content, right, which will be empty, right, and then your JavaScript can refer to those pieces of the HTML, right? It says, hey, that div that is currently empty that has an ID of summary, right? I want to put stuff in there, right? And so you can refer. We'll see in a minute how to do that. You can have JavaScript refer to various portions of the documents, right? We'll see that in a minute. Yep.
I have one question too.
Yes.
It's kind of related, I guess.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that's what you were answering, but instead of writing the JavaScript in the HTML,
Yep.
like how do we tell the?
Where do I put stuff? Where the content goes?
Yeah, because I guess with Angular you can route it
Yep.
to refer to a specific HTML.
Yep.
But I don't know how it works for like the.
Yeah, we'll do that in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. We'll do it in a second. Yes, here we're embedding the JavaScript right here and there, right? It says we dynamic content, static, dynamic, static, dynamic. So typically you might instead just put placeholders, right, that are empty, empty divs or empty spans, right, with appropriate IDs or appropriate classes, which you can then either using jQuery, right, or plain JavaScript, you can then refer to those IDs or refer to those classes, grab those elements by ID or grab them by class, right? Get element by ID, right? And then you can inject dynamically whatever content you want, right? Which we'll do in a second. Okay. Your question? Yes.
so the JavaScript slow down the render.
Slows down the rendering.
Yes.
Well, yes, there is a time. Yeah, there is a time that it needs to execute. Yes, that is true. And there's always a question, right, on how much how much does it matter, right? It's, depending on what page you're looking at, right? If you're looking at the very first page that comes up, right? It's very, very important. The speed there is very, very important, right? Because it's a landing page, right? The user comes in, doesn't want to see lots of spinning things that are, rendering, running. Oh, wait, I got to calculate what I need to show here. Let me go fetch content. I want to see content right away, right? So certainly some pages we want to reduce as much as possible whatever dynamic content might be, right? So that they come up immediately, right? When the page comes up, I don't want to have to calculate any of this content. Yes. So typically, a lot of some pages might be strategically targeted at rendering on the server, right? So a lot of this dynamic content is already resolved on the server side, right? So that when the page downloads, it's already the HTML, right? There is no need to go back anywhere to calculate what content I'm going to show. Yes. So it's certainly on the first page, right? But as you then start interacting with the page, right, once you've engaged the user, right, and says, "Oh, I got him," and he starts, navigating around the page, or using our web application, right? There are content that definitely has to be dynamic, right? I'm deleting something, I'm moving things around, right? I'm adding content, and God forbid I don't want to refresh the page. That's even slower, right? If they're removing a single line item, right, it's much faster to remove that one line item and dynamically re-render that one line item instead of downloading an entire page and re-rendering the entire page. Does that make sense? So there's always a balance between, our first load, right, that I want it to be as fast as possible, right? So that I might render on the server. I do all my JavaScript or Java or whatever, right, or PHP, God forbid, and render that on the server, right, all HTML, and then use JavaScript to strategically remove things and add things and update as I need to. That makes sense? Okay. All right. For the first half of the course, we are going to do mostly everything dynamically on the client. Okay, and our web applications will be simple enough that performance won't be an issue. Okay, but certainly that is a valid concern, right? When we see EJS towards the end of the course and we see server-side rendering, okay, we'll revisit that issue, right? Where let's render some of this on the server side so that we're not bogging down the client, the browser, right, that has to render this and calculate all this. Okay. So yes, thank you. Here we have just some simple math, right? We're just saying document.write. We can just do some, whatever mathematical expression we might want to do here, right? We can add. You can do date manipulation, right? String manipulation, and all sorts of things that you might expect in a programming language. Here we are dynamically rendering a table. Okay. We have the outer one. We have the outer table, right? Although we could have done that also inside of the script, but nevertheless, here's a table, right? And inside we are dynamically, right, generating an HTML string, right? We say here's the HTML. I'm iterating, and as I iterate over 10 rows, I am dynamically generating TRs. Right? I am concatenating TR, right? And for each TR, I'm then notice that it's a two nested loops, right? The outer one is for rows, and the inner ones is for columns, right? We have 10 rows of 10 columns, yes. And we're adding for each one we're adding the TR, and then for the columns we're adding TDs for the row, and we're calculating here, multiplying whatever the row is times the column, right? So 1 times 1, 1 times 2, 1 times 3, right? We're calculating all that, and we're closing TR, and finally we're writing the entire HTML back to the document, right? We are generating dynamic HTML programmatically from JavaScript, something you should never do. Okay, it's very, very error prone. It's very, very hard to write good HTML, right, from a language that is not designed, right, to write HTML. It's a language designed to write JavaScript, yes? Right? It's very, very error prone to do something like this. Okay, I might miss a closing slash, right? The editor is not helping me, and identifying any errors, right? Any errors that I might find are only at runtime. See that? The IDE is not helping me, highlighting where I'm missing a closing tag or, right? Nevertheless, it's something that can be done. Okay, you can do this on the server side too, right? PHP does it all the time, right? Java, JSPs do it all the time, right? ASP do it all the time. But those languages also, right? They're not designed to, they're C#, right? They're Java. It's very hard to write good HTML code with language that is not meant to write HTML code, right? But it can be done, right? This is a very common technique early on, right? Of generating dynamic HTML, right? By concatenating strings, okay? But just so you know, it's very error prone, very, very hard to, it's very hard to maintain code like this, right? You have JavaScript, then concatenate HTML, then JavaScript again, and then HTML. Very, very hard. So this is not how we're going to generate dynamic content. Okay, this is not how we're going to generate it. And you should not either. Okay, so let's functions. Functions, like you would expect, right? It allows you to, like you were expecting in other languages, right? Allows you to encapsulate algorithms, right? That you might want to reuse. It's one of the easiest forms of abstraction, right? You give a name to some set of steps, some algorithm that you like to be able to reuse, right? So in this case, something very trivial. A function that takes two arguments, A and B. Notice that the arguments don't have types, right? They don't even have bar, right? So it's implicit, right? That these are variables in this function. They're local variables. These variables only exist in the scope of this function, like you would expect, right? In other languages. They also have return. Notice that we don't have a return type, right? So that we don't have a return type. We don't have types for the parameters either. And we're passing them just like you would expect, add A, comma B, and we have a left-hand side that receives the result, and then we're displaying an alert. Okay. But functions are somewhat more powerful here in JavaScript than perhaps in other languages. Well, in older versions of languages. Just like we can pass A and B, right? A and B are variables, right? They're integers. From context, you see that A and B are integers, yes? You can pass them to functions. Well, functions can be passed to functions, right? Functions and non-functions, right? They all have the same capability of being passed as arguments, right? And once you receive it as an argument from within a function, you can call that function. You can invoke the function. Very, very powerful. There's first order citizens, right? Very, very nice in there. And that's going to introduce a syntax that I think many of you are going to find somewhat disconcerting. Okay, which we'll show you. It's disconcerting, but it's very, very common in JavaScript, and you should start becoming familiar with it. Oh, here's what one of the students was asking, getting elements by ID, right? So the content is already there, right? So you have this H1 here, you have this paragraph. You can retrieve anything on the document, right, if it has a unique identifier. Okay, so in this case, we have here 3 input fields and a button, yes? And they have been uniquely identified with ID, right? If you look at the source code, oh, no, not here, sorry, source, H source. Notice that the input fields have been uniquely identified with A, B, and C. Okay, that means that this input field, right, has already been parsed, right, by the browser. It already lives in the DOM, right, and it has a unique identifier of A, B, and C. One of them has A, the other one has B, the other one has C, right? We can retrieve any element whatsoever that has an ID. Okay, I can retrieve it, right, from within JavaScript, and then I can manipulate it. Once I have it in JavaScript, I can then do whatever I want with it. Right? I can put content in there. I can remove it. Right? I can change its color. I can change its style. I can do whatever I want. Right? In this case, what we're doing here is we're saying document.getElement by ID A, where A is that ID we used earlier. Yes, right. So that piece of text, right, without the .value, the document.getElement by ID, I now have that input field. Right now I have that input. What could I do with it? I could do whatever I want. I can change its borders. I can change its background color. I can remove it from the DOM. Right. I can do all sorts of things. One of the things that I can do, right, is I can retrieve its value. Right, meaning whatever you type, whatever. Now, different elements have different things associated with the value. Right, the input field, its value is whatever you type in the input field. That's its value, right? By default, it's just the empty string, right? If you don't type anything in it and you ask for its value, it will be the empty string, yes. But if you type anything else, it'll be, well, whatever it is that you type in there. Okay. So here we're retrieving the values of the input field A and the input field B, right? And by default, right, these values are strings, right? They're the most generic data type. Yes, they can represent anything. They can represent dates. They can represent integers. They can represent just plain old strings. Yes, social security numbers, credit card numbers. They can represent anything, right? So that's why when you get them, they are strings. They are A and B are type strings. Okay? If I apply, notice that what I'm doing, C is equal to A plus B, right? At runtime, right, when this runs, it says what type is A and what type is B. They're strings, right? Because that's what the input field gives me as strings. This says, oh, you want concatenation, right? But that's not what we want, right? Inside, they're really integers, hopefully, right? You type integers, but it won't do the extra work and figure out that, oh, these are integers. I should treat them as integers, right? It won't do that extra work. We need to do that by hand. We're using parseInt as a native function in JavaScript, which will parse the string and convert it into an integer representation. Okay? Once we have A and B, the integer values of A and B, we calculate C, and we then use the document.getElement by ID C, meaning we're retrieving this guy right here, the DOM element, right, that represents this input field, and then we're saying dot, and then whatever we want to do with it, right? We can change the style, we can change whatever, right? We're changing the value attribute, okay, and we're making it equal to the C, which is an integer, right? That makes sense. Something else that is introduced here is that the add button has been associated to an event handler. Okay, this says that if this button is clicked, right, this function should run. Okay, so it says on click, right, then you execute that function, which is that function we had earlier, right? There it is, function add. So that function never executes, right, until that button gets clicked. Okay. And I believe that is a segue into event handlers. On click, yeah. But on click. So here we have three buttons. Right. The first one invokes a function that just says hello world. This one, I believe it just says hello. I think it's passing in arguments. And this one is, you can say some message. It'll say that some message. So let's look at this real quick. the source to this. So yeah, so we have three functions. Say hello, just says alert, and it's hard-coded. Hello world. The second one takes the message as argument, and the last one, notice what it's doing, right? It says document get element by ID the message, right? So there must be some input field whose ID is message, right? And then retrieving that message, and then says alert on that message. So here's we have onClick invokes say hello. This one says onClick calls same message, but has as argument hello. Notice that it has double quotes outside, but single quotes inside, right? That could be the inverse, and that's okay. And the last one just calls the say input, right? When say input retrieves this input field, whose ID is message, retrieves it, and then uses that as the message. Yes? Very easy. Source. Right, so I had mentioned that instead of, oh, wait, sorry. Instead of having all that source, right, all that source code, that script tag, having those three functions, right, embedded inside of the HTML, right, what I'm going to require from you is that instead you have a separate file, right, a separate JavaScript file that lives elsewhere, okay? And that JavaScript file can always refer to the DOM, anywhere in the DOM. It can manipulate and do whatever it wants with the DOM, okay? Right now it's by ID, okay, but we will quickly move to a much more powerful way, right, of referring to the DOM, right, when we see jQuery, right, perhaps at the end of this class, of this lecture. jQuery provides a very, very powerful mechanism, right, to refer to anything on the page, okay? So anyway, so here notice that there is no embedded JavaScript in this page, right? Instead, there is a separate JavaScript file, right, that has some dummy JavaScript in there. That it's grabbing an element by ID, and then, oh, here, yes. Notice that what it's doing here is that it's saying it's grabbing an element by ID, which is the element is this here. Notice an H2. See the H2? Notice that the H2 is a placeholder, right? Notice that it's empty. The H2 is empty, even though it renders. That H2 renders. And the reason it renders is that from JavaScript, right, we are retrieving the H2 with its ID, yes? And then we're dynamically changing its inner HTML. Right, so grab the DOM, right, and then insert inside, right, this inside the HTML. Okay, and this is a very simple example, right? But this is the underpinning, right, of what we're going to be doing later in Angular. Right, in Angular, we're going to be defining an empty space, right, an empty view with no content, right. And you look at the index page, there's nothing in it, just this view. It says, where's the content, right? And as we progress and talk about Angular, and we'll see that all the content is being injected, right, into that view, right, dynamically, right, as you navigate between one page and the next, right? That one single div is the only placeholder where we are going to inject content, and it'll render. It'll look like you're navigating from one page and loading to another page, but no. It's just a single page. Right? You've only loaded one single page, and we dynamically inject content using this, right, this underlying framework, this underlying technique, right, of being able to grab, right, an element, right, and then just manipulate its inner HTML property. Make sense? Right now it's trivial, but it'll become much more interesting as we introduce more powerful techniques. But yeah, so all your JavaScript should be in a source file. Okay. Down below, I believe we have, yeah, but down below, each one of these examples should have links. Well, it should show you the content, right, of the page that's being rendered. Plus, any other files that this example depends on, right, should be available here. If you don't see it, please bring it to my attention, right? JSON. So JSON, as I mentioned earlier, right, it stands for JavaScript object notation. It'll be our way of representing objects in JavaScript. Okay, it's very, very simple. It's you use curly brackets, right? An empty curly bracket is an empty object, but it is an instance. It's an instance of an object, right? So here's Alice. Here's an instance of an object, right? That has 3 properties: first, last, and salary, right? First is Alice, last is Wonderland, and salary is 100,000. Right? Notice that 2 of the properties have quotes, so presumably first and last, they're both string properties, right? Whereas salary, notice that the number does not have strings, which is a number, right? Other data types supported here are dates, floating point values, okay, arrays, or objects. You can have a nested object, right? So salary could be, well, not salary. You have another nested object underneath. Notice here that I did not have a semicolon. Semicolons are optional in JavaScript, but I encourage you to add the semicolons nevertheless. We say that Alice here is it's an instance. It's an instance object. It's a literal object. It's a literal object, as opposed to having a class, which you can then call new on it and instantiate an object. We'll see that a little later, right? This is a literal class, literal object. Here's Bob, which has the same 2 properties, right, first and last, but does not have salary, right? Bob is working for free. The properties, notice that the properties here, the proper way of declaring properties is to quote them as well, right? To also quote these properties, they should have quotes here. Quotes, quotes, quotes. That is the proper way to represent attributes. But the language is forgiving enough, right? It understands that the left-hand side of a colon is a property, right? And the right-hand side is the value for that property, right? So it understands that, right? But nevertheless, you should know, right, that in some cases, you will have to add those quotes. And when you interact with web APIs or with your own, right, with your own APIs that you're interacting with the server, asking for data, retrieving data, sending data over, you'll notice that the JSON that goes back and forth is proper JSON, right? And all the properties will be properly quoted. Okay, and you ask why are these quoted? I didn't even add them, right? So a property can be any string, so it could have spaces in there. That's okay, right? As long as you quote them, right? You can have a long property, right? Date space of space birth, right? A single property. Okay, and quotations allow you to do that. What else? Let's see. So yeah, there are two instances, and we're going to see lots and lots of JSON in this class. All right. Namespaces. Right. So when you now I mentioned earlier that that a page, when it downloads, right, it will go off and download other resources. Yes, it'll download images from Google, it'll download CSS from Bootstrap, maybe even JavaScript from Bootstrap, right? Maybe it'll go off to Google and download JavaScript from Google. It'll go off to Amazon and download. If you're making a cart application, it'll download the API from Amazon. Yes. So while you're downloading all these JavaScript, notice that you have your own JavaScript, right, that you wrote, right? And you declare certain variables and certain functions, right? Well, what's to stop other libraries to declare the same exact variables, the same exact functions, with the same name? Well, it turns out that JavaScript is fine with doing that. Right? The browser is happy to have functions all over the place with the same name. It follows a simple rule that last wins. The last function that gets loaded that has the same name as some other function wins. Right? It just overrides whatever functions in there that has exactly the same name. See that? Because you're downloading libraries from different places, right? It could happen that you have a name collision. Yes? Right? And we have to take care of that. Right? How do we do that? How do we create a namespace, right, that it's safe regardless of what other libraries might be loading? Okay, so you will see this pattern in quite several of the examples out there, right? Where your code no longer is inside of just plain scripts or in a plain JavaScript file, right? It's surrounded by this design pattern. You have this function. You have the function, curly brackets. What does that do? Well, whatever's in here is local variables within the scope of this function. You see that? Right? And notice that outside of this function, right, you have this parentheses out here, right? What this is doing is that it's using a couple of techniques. Well, one of them is that anything you declare in a function is local scope to that function, right? And it's private. It cannot be accessed from anywhere outside of that function, right? So it renders everything inside of the function private, right? Something that is premium when you are having so many scripts, right, that you might be downloaded from all over the place, right? You want things to be able to compartmentalize, right? To make modules that are self-contained, right? That do not collide with other things that you might be downloading. So it's using that technique. The other thing that it's using here is that functions are first-order citizens, right? You can pass them as arguments to other places, right? Well, here, this function is kind of like an argument to this parentheses here, right? And with this parentheses that ends up here, what it does is that it takes this function that is being passed to an anonymous function, right? And it's immediately invoking it. It's immediately invoking the function, right? It's an immediate function invocation expression. I think it's the acronym is IFF, right? IFFE expression. Okay, so it's an immediate a function that gets invoked, right? So when your page loads and it looks at this, the function runs. So in here is where you would put kind of like your start, your main, when your application starts up, right? Whatever you want it to do, you would put it inside of this function, and whatever your code does starts manipulating and removing things and changing things and defining event handlers and going off to the server, whatever, right? It would be inside of this inside of this self-executing function. Okay, and it's now safe against any other libraries that might be loaded. That makes sense? Okay. This pattern, this is a design pattern, very, very common design pattern used, in environments where you have lots of coders, lots of libraries, right? In real industrial environments, right? So I encourage you to use these kinds of design patterns, become familiar with them, right, and become accustomed to this way of coding. Now, if you're coding for yourself and you're playing around with things, you don't need this design pattern. It's an overkill. Okay. But nevertheless, I think we should practice, right? Some of industrial strength design patterns that you will find very often out there. Okay. All right. This design pattern can go a little bit further. Okay. Which I think I have an example right after this. Do I? In that, since this is a function, okay, functions could return things. Functions could return something. So on the left-hand side of this, you could create a variable, say variable, right, and declare a variable there that might be the name of some module that you might be writing, right, that you might want to use all over your application, right? So for instance, jQuery does this, right? It declares a global variable, right, that can be used anywhere, right? It declares a global variable jQuery. Right? jQuery is a global variable. Once you load, right, the jQuery library, you now have the jQuery variable that you can invoke from anywhere, right? And good thing that jQuery is so popular that it reduces the possibility that it'll be colliding with somebody else using the jQuery language. But it happens, right? So for instance, it happens many times that that you're writing modules or you're writing code that is then going to be included in WordPress, for instance, right? And it happens that you wrote your module using a newer version of jQuery, but WordPress is using an older version of jQuery, right? So oftentimes you're going to need, oh, well, that old jQuery doesn't support this, that, and the other, right? So you could, in your page, right, in your content manager, you could load the newer version of jQuery, but now you have the problem of collision, right? Because WordPress is downloading, declaring the jQuery namespace, and you're declaring the jQuery namespace, right? So you have to be able to deal with these issues, and this technique allows you to do that, right? To redefine the namespace and say, no, these are two separate namespaces, right? And I don't want them to collide, right? So yeah, we'll see how to use modules in a minute. Yes. Yeah. So notice that the script is using, it's a source is loading the script, right? And in that script, right, we have just a simple hello world, right? It's grabbing an element. So even though it's inside of this function, right, it still has access to the DOM like normally, right? It can still manipulate the DOM, right? And it's invoked. It runs right away. It's kind of like our main function, right? That executes in here. So yeah, so that's a design pattern. Callbacks. Yeah. So oh, really? I guess I didn't push this. All right, I'll deal with callbacks a little later. Or maybe we'll do an example here. Modules. We have modules, app, modules. Oh, okay, here it is. All right, so here's an empty file, right? It has modules, and it's only loading two files here, right? It's loading app.js and modules. So in the modules, right, is where I would create my awesome new module, right, that competes with jQuery, does tons of really great things, right? And I think that everybody's going to love this module I've written, right? And it becomes as popular as jQuery, right? So the way I would do that is that I want to use the same pattern, right? I want to use the same pattern, right? That I want to declare it inside of a namespace that is not going to collide with anyone else, right? It's not going to collide with older versions of jQuery or older versions of whatever, right? And I use a pattern of an immediately executable function here, right? And inside of that function, right, this is my main, and I declare all my functions in here. And because I declare all my functions in here, all my variables in here, they are protected from any other namespace. Yes? I can use whatever function name I want in here. It's not going to collide with any other functions out there. Yes? That's the whole point of putting it inside of a function that executes. Yes? Right? All right, so, but I want others to be able to invoke the functions in here, in this function, right, inside of my module. I want to export the functionality of this module outside, right? So others can call the functions in here, right? So the way to do that is to, create all my functions in here: add, subtract, multiply, divide, logarithms, sine, cosine, tangent. It's a very thorough math module, yes? Does really, really cool thing, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. It does all sorts of things, right? But I want people to use it. So I declare all my functions in here. I know it's not colliding with anyone else, right? Because it's using the design pattern of immediately invoking functions, yes, right? But to export it, what we do notice that it has an var math equal. That math variable is outside of my namespace. So that math variable is available to anyone else who loads my library. Yes? That math variable is accessible to anybody. Okay? So that math variable might be a problem, right? It might collide with others you declaring variables also the same name math. Yes? So perhaps I might choose a name here that might be a little more more specific. Okay? Use something, maybe my last name, or maybe use my company name, right? Or use some name that I can somewhat be I can market, right? That I can let others know that this is my name, right? It's my library. Make sure you don't collide with me. Nevertheless, it happens all the time. Like the $sign. The $sign variable is one of the most problematic variables because so many libraries, right, like to use the $sign, right, as a very quick name for their library, right? We'll see when we get to jQuery, $sign, right? You can, instead of using the jQuery name, right, $sign is an alias, right? They can very quickly use it as an alias to jQuery, right? But many other libraries use the $sign. If you load the libraries, yes, one after another, they trample on each other, right? They override each other, right? So the same thing could happen here, right? My name for my module, it might be too common name, right? So I might choose something a little more specific, right? Nevertheless, it doesn't distract from the technique, yes? So the technique is I declare my functions, and then above, I declare somewhat like an interface, that how I want others to be able to invoke me, right? Invoke the things that are inside of this namespace. All right, so I declare an object, and I say API. So that's my local variable API. It's an object that has two properties, right? Add and subtract. Yes, those are the properties, and the values are the functions that are declared down below. You see that, those functions? So the right-hand side are the values, which are functions. Yes. On the left-hand side, add and subtract, those are names, right? And then what I do is that I return API. You see that? I return that API. Also, here's another good practice. I'm declaring the interface above at the top. Local variables are declared at the top, so I don't have to search and find variables down at the bottom. So because typically in Western cultures we read from top to bottom. So yes, it's way at the top. Yes. And my return is there, right there, right? So right away, I know that this module is declaring this interface, right? And I return it. Now, outside of this module, I have another JavaScript, right? Notice that first I load the modules, just like I would first load libraries, like jQuery. I would load jQuery libraries. I would load all, Angular, or I would load whatever, right? And each one declares its own name, right? jQuery uses jQuery, Angular uses Angular, okay? And these are very unique names. Mine is not very unique. Mine is math. Okay, not very unique. But nevertheless, here's my main, right? Here's my main, yes? Oops. In my main, I'm using the same technique. Yes, I'm using the same technique of a self-executable function that executes right away. But because it's because it's a divided or separated from other modules, right? Since it's declaring its own little space, yes. Notice that we're passing along the math variable to the function. See that? And then in there, I can use the add function that is declaring that other module, add or subtract or whatever I want, right? This is a very common technique, right, for creating modules, right, and then being able to use those modules in other places, right? So you communicate between modules by passing these around one another. Okay. Again, if you're just playing around with JavaScript, right, this is an overkill. Yes.
Why do we need to put math inside the, as an argument at the end of the function?
Yeah. In this case, math is global, right? It's a global variable, and it was loaded right before my main. Yes. So I don't have to pass it, right? But it's a common technique where you outside you have the name of the module, but inside, right, as an argument, you can rename it to something else, like M or underscore M, right? And then inside of your module, right, inside your main, you use whatever name, local name you might want to use. Okay. So in this case, yes, math is global, right? I don't really need to pass it as an argument, right? But a very common technique is to pass it and then use some other name. For instance, when you have different versions of jQuery, right? You might pass it as an argument, the outer version of jQuery, and inside rename it to something else, so you don't collide, right, with older versions of jQuery. Right? And when we get to jQuery, we'll use that technique to be able to deal with different versions of jQuery, right, which is a common issue, especially if you're writing code inside of content management systems. Yes.
So if you rename the argument, say the function math
To M.
M, you
Right.
can still get access to this math to
Yes.
your older version.
Yes, you can.
Original one. So you
Right.
can have both of those.
Yes, you can. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, modules. Let's see, where am I? Modules 2. Let's see. This is a little more involved example. So here we're declaring two modules and an app, my own app. So let's see. Let's look at the module 1. Let me close these. Module 2 and app. Okay, so here we have a couple of these where we're first declaring our top level application, right? That might declare its own API, or maybe have its own main, right? Where that might do something in there, right? I'm only showing you that the module could be extended, right? So here's a module that has nothing in it; it's empty, right? But then I can declare all the modules that build on top of a base module, right? So here's a base module that it's empty right now. It only declares a local variable of API. Okay, so it doesn't have any APIs right now, right? But later, two modules that are loaded later, right? Extend this, saying that I am declaring several functions in here, right? That just do some simple alerts, right? And I'm adding them to this variable, right? That is then returned and added to a new property in the app that was declared previously. That's another very interesting things in JavaScript. You have an object that declares 3 properties. You can dynamically add as many properties as you want at any time. Okay, very cool, right? Try doing that with Java, right? It's very strongly typed, where you declare the properties in a class, right? And you can't just all of a sudden say, oh, I forgot, I need 3 more properties, right? You can do that in JavaScript. You can have properties that are dynamically generated as user types, You can grab those properties and just add them to objects. Very, very popular, very, very powerful. Here we're adding to our app that was declared earlier, right? Notice that we're first loading app, and then we're loading two modules, right, that extend each one of these, right? Right. So here's we're adding events, right? And we're passing it. Oops, we're passing it and appending it to the events property, and then here we have the second module doing the same thing, adding new events, right? And then outside, if you click one button, it invokes one event, or if you click the other button, it invokes the second event. Anyway, go through these examples, look at the videos, look at all of them, even the jQuery ones. Okay, so you come on Thursday, and we can go a little faster and look and play around that some more. All right, any questions? All right, I'll be in my office at 1:30 if you want to come and chat. All right. If you remember that you can also, if you have questions on projects, remember that you can also call me. Between 5 and 6 every day. You can call me between 5 and 6, and we can chat all you want. You'll have my undivided attention. All right. All right. Thank you.